friends, today I'm going to share with you 7 of my favorite witchy reference books. Now, these are books that I have on my shelf that I pull out on a regular basis. You're actually going to see a lot of them are filled to the brim with sticky notes. I'm going to share with you why I like them, what I use them for, and why you might consider checking them out. So let's get into it. First things first, this is one of my favorite books of all time. If you're like me and you started this journey as a skeptic and you love to learn the science behind how these things work, you are going to love Why Woo Woo Works by Dr. David Hamilton. This one in particular, I reference for the studies that are in it. So there's a lot of really great studies, particularly in the chapter about how Reiki works. That talk about different studies that have been done on Reiki, including placebo-controlled studies. There's a lot of really great scientific research that he has packed in here and referenced in here. The other thing I really like about this book is the way that he talks about the placebo effect. And he essentially talks about it as this idea that whenever you have a methodology that produces results, there's multiple active ingredients. So for instance, he talks about this one study that was done on doctors where it showed that patients with the same diagnosis, same treatment plan, when they're treated by a doctor who is confident, had better results than a doctor that was a little bit more unsure about the diagnosis. And he basically says, like, this is an example of the placebo effect, but we would never say to doctors like, hey, stop being confident because it's a placebo effect. And so that really gave me a big light bulb when I was first kind of researching these topics, researching the science, really helped me see it in a different perspective. It doesn't just talk about Reiki, it talks about crystals, it talks about meditation. I think it even talks about like, it talks about nature sounds. It's a really good one if you want to dive into the science, why woo-woo works. Next one, if you've followed me for a while, you've heard me talk about this. This is Change Your Energy by Krista Mitchell. This was the first book I ever picked up on crystals. It was the first book that I found that really walked through everything I needed to know about crystals, but in a way that was easy to digest. So before I found this book, I was finding myself with a lot of questions. Like crystal books would say, you need to charge them. I'd be like, what the hell is that? And then a book would be like, here's what charging is. But I'd be like, okay, how do I do it? Why do I do it? When do I do it? This one really walks you through how to work with your crystals from start to finish. The reason I reference it now, and you can see I have quite a few sticky notes, is Krista is a master at combining crystals for specific needs. She was a professional crystal healer in New York City for, I think it was like 17 or 18 years. She's one of my teachers. I just absolutely adore her. And so I used to go through and sticky note the ones that really worked for me. And so this one, I remember very distinctly when I was working with survivors of sexual violence. This was a crystal combo that I used. She says it's for counselors, therapists, and social workers. Wear rose quartz for love and compassion, amethyst for intuition and insight, and jet to keep you from feeling drained by other people's energy. And so I would basically sticky note these, try them out, write about my experience. I also really like in the back, there are some great layouts. So if you want to practice laying stones on your body for healing, there's some that I really love. The beginner's layout is one that I still go back to. It's one of the most powerful layouts I've ever done. And then if you are interested in just learning about kind of the basics, what crystal would I use for this? It's got that in there as well as a colorful little index in the back. So this is probably my go-to if you're interested in learning about crystal healing, want to dive in deeper to crystal healing. Krista Mitchell is just like the Beyonce of crystal healing. So you can't go wrong with this one. Next, people always ask me for books about Reiki. I have a really hard time finding books about Reiki that I actually like. I think it's because one day I'll write one. But I really, really like this author, Franz Stein. So he is, I would call him like a Usui Reiki purist. He studied in Japan for many years. And I really just like the way that he talks about the practice of Reiki. So he describes the practice of Reiki as less about this sort of practice of just like moving energy through the body and more so of that being a piece of a larger puzzle. And the larger puzzle being this pathway home to our true self, our great bright light. And I really love that he brings in the historic, cultural Japanese pieces of the practice. For me, as someone who's practiced Reiki for 7, 8 years now. This really helped me understand the why behind some of the things that we do in Reiki, and really helped me understand what some of the words mean from like a translation perspective. It really gave me new insights into the practice and helped me dive deeper into my practice. So this is The Way of Reiki, The Inner Teachings of Usui by Fran Stein. Love this one. Next. If you're looking for a good book to understand the properties of different crystals, I highly recommend The Encyclopedia of Crystals by Judy Hall. Again, if you've been around the block with me for a while, you've heard me talk about this one because I think it's one of the best. I really like it because I use it for both understanding the properties of crystals, but also identification. So say I have a green crystal, I don't know what it is, I can flip through the green section and find ones that look similar to it, and then test the hardness of it. It has the Mohs scale in here, so you can find out what the hardness is. You can do a Mohs scale test and figure out what crystal it is. The other thing I really like about this is it often will talk about the lore or the history of the crystal in some of them, not all of them, but quite a few of them, which if you follow me on Instagram, you know I have a series all about the history, mythology, and lore of crystals. I just find it really helpful when you're learning the properties of crystals to understand where they came from. For instance, you know, carnelian is a really good crystal for courage and confidence, and it was also used in battle for soldiers to feel more like protected and more strong. So that always helps me just understand kind of like where those properties came from. So instead of just feeling like I have to memorize what each crystal does, if I just know the story behind them, the properties memorize themselves in a way. So love this one. Next. This is probably the one that I reference the most, but talk about the least. But this is called Staying Healthy with the Seasons by Dr. Elson Haas, whatever. It's a traditional Chinese medicine book, which is the original kind of energetic map that I was taught when I was a yoga teacher, when I was getting into energy work. And so this had become like my blueprint for how I live. So essentially, this talks about the way that traditional Chinese medicine works with the seasons. So in essence, to boil it down to a sentence, right? The belief is that when we are in harmony with nature, we experience more harmony within. So this is really a guidebook to how to do that. It goes through each of the seasons, the summer, right? It has like all of the correspondence. But then it also talks you through recipes. It talks you through the meaning behind the season, the element that it's associated with, the parts of the body that corresponds with. It talks about, you know, for example, the summer, the digestive system. So it brings in that science as well. And it gives you some really, really powerful advice around how you can not just align with the season in your diet and your movement practices, but sort of your awareness, your mentality. It's just a really, really cool book to come back to. Every season I come back to it, especially when I do my equinox and solstice events. I always reread the chapter just to kind of settle myself in the energy of the season. And I find that, I mean, I've had this book for probably 6-7 years at this point. When was it published? It was published in 1981 and then 2003. I've had it for a long time, and every single time I review it, I find something new in it. So I highly, highly recommend this one if you're interested at all in the energy of the seasons, traditional Chinese medicine, or becoming more harmonized with the energy of the environment. Next. Okay, this is a really good one if you want to take a deep dive into the chakra system. I will tell you, I have read this book front to back. It is a gruel to read it that way. There's a lot of really great info in here, but it is very, very, very dense. And so don't worry if you read it front to back and you feel like you didn't digest any of it. Don't worry. I really get the most benefit when I go back through. So say like when we were recording the chakra series on the podcast, I would go back through like chakra 3, you know, it's about the fire element. So there's a whole page, a couple of pages on like power and what that means, and willpower. There's some really, really great examples in here of how the chakras show up in our life. You know, there's different different pages that I think you'd be interested in that are kind of like tangentially related to the chakras, like clairsentience and how that shows up and how it corresponds with the sacral chakra. If you're interested in learning more about like how the chakras affect your emotional, your physical body, this is a really good one. Like I said, it's kind of a bear to sit down and read front to back. I do think it's worthwhile to do that because then you can kind of flip back to wherever you want to dive in deeper on and have the context around it. But just know it is a bear to get through, but it is so worth it. And I'm always going back to this one. Finally, one that you have seen me talk about many, many times. This is Cunningham's, what is it called? Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. This is the one that I reference whenever I'm doing my simmer pots, my spell jars. If I'm just making lunch and I want to make it a little bit more witchy, this is a really, really great one. The thing that I like most about it is, so for instance, it has chamomile in here. It has the magical intentions, but it also has some uses for it. So for instance, like I said with the crystal one, where it talks about kind of the mythology, the history, the lure of why we use certain crystals, it's the same thing for the herbs in this one. So for instance, the cherry has long been used to stimulate or attract love. A beautiful Japanese spell to find love is simple. Tie a single strand of your hair to a blossoming cherry tree. And so knowing that history of cherry is going to help me remember what cherry does so much more. The other thing I really like about Cunningham's book is that you can go to the index and find the correspondences based on what you want to do. So say I wanted to do a spell to maintain health, right? I've got a whole list of herbs in here. So I can go to my spice drawer and just see which one of these do I have and add it to my simmer pot or add it to my lunch or whatever. But you can also go through and say I was making lunch with mint, okay? Say I was making like some sort of like mint tea or mint sauce or whatever. I can open up the mint page and just see that like, okay, so the powers are money, lust, healing, travel, exorcism, protection. And then I can read about the magical uses, the historic uses, and where those come from. So I love this book. I think it's so easy to just have in your kitchen. I've given you the advice before that instead of going out to buy a bunch of witchy ingredients, just go through the stuff you already have, your tea cabinet, your spice drawer, take out a book like this, look up each thing, label it with the different magical properties, and then I almost guarantee have everything that you need to do any spell you're looking for already in your kitchen, and this is a book that will help you get there. Okay, my friends, those were my favorite witchy reference books. I will leave a link to my Amazon list of all of them if you want to check them out or write them down, buy them at your local bookstore, whatever you want to do. I want to know what your favorite witchy reference book is, though, because I'm always looking to add to my shelf. So go ahead and drop that in the comments and subscribe for more. Bye.